They agree to only working 5 days a week? No. They did agree 2 years later to an 8-hour day. And that sort of settled the steel strike. Strikes are very tough. The one I can remember the most that I was not involved in but felt the effects of later, and I'll kind of explain this to you, was the teacher strike in Billings, Montana. And the teachers union is, I try to explain, so we're off task a little, but we're talking about strikes. Wyoming is a right-to-work state. What does that mean? Are they friendly with strikes? Very unfriendly with strikes. They would pull a Calvin Coolidge on you, okay? Montana, as far as teachers go, is one of the strongest teacher unions in the country. I'll give you an example. You ever heard of the word tenure? Tenure, T-E-N-U-R-E, means depending on the district, but in Montana by law, when a teacher is offered their 4th contract, they are tenured, which means it almost takes an act of Congress to fire them. It's basically, if you tenure a teacher in Montana, you're signing them to a lifetime contract. The only way they get fired is they do something immoral or illegal, pretty much, okay? When I was a school superintendent in Montana and I had some teachers, and I was kind of known as kind of not a very nice person, because if you were going to get tenure with me, you better be good, because I was not giving you a lifetime contract if you were bad. Now in Montana, if a person comes up with their 4th contract, and all you have to say if you don't want them back is, I can find a better teacher. You don't have to give them a reason. And you're better off not to give them a reason, because if you give them a reason, then they're going to get a lawyer to use it against you. So if you don't want to tenure a teacher in Montana, you basically just state, I can find a better teacher, or I don't have to give a reason. I did a lot to a lot of teachers. I was in a small school district. I wasn't into teachers that were there for the paycheck. I wasn't into teachers that didn't care about kids. And you had to be pretty good if I tenured you. If I tenured you, you were a good teacher. And I didn't tenure many, okay? Well, what happens is once they get tenured, it's hard to get rid of them. And they'll tell you, lawyers will tell you that it's going to cost you 6 figures if you're a school administrator to get rid of a teacher in Montana that's tenured. 6 figures is a minimum of $100,000, okay? And that's about 4 years of salary in Montana. But anyway, so you have to be kind of ready to go. Well, the point I'm making is that Billings had a lot of older tenured teachers. Not much you could do to them. Well, they don't like the salaries they're getting, so they go on strike. Now, what do you think the Billings school system did when those teachers went on strike August 20th, the day before school started? Well, you'd think that's what the teachers would have liked.
They went on strike, so they could fire.
No, they couldn't fire them because the teachers' union is so strong there. But with what? Not new, substitutes. So you couldn't hire new teachers, but you could hire teachers to come in, which are referred to as, what the naughty word is, if you come in and step on a strike and you cross the picket line and go to work, you become known as a scab. That's a very common term. And can you imagine walking to work as a substitute teacher for these teachers, them yelling names at you, acting like they're 12 years old in a dispute? And can you imagine being a student walking into the front door of this school with all of the teachers in this school yelling and screaming obscenities at the people coming in? That's what happened. No, that's what happened.
Tell them off right to their face and walk in the
Yeah,
school.
well, the point being is this. It puts people in a tough situation. My son Sheldon was a teacher. He just got a job in Spokane. His wife just got a job as a professor at Eastern Washington, which I'm very proud of. But anyway, he was teaching in Seattle the last few years. His middle school, the entire Seattle district went on strike on August 15th of last summer. He is just like me. I would have such a hard time not coming to work and teaching you kids every day. I couldn't do it. I think I would have to put my reputation on the line as a scab and come in and do this. And he feels the same way I did. But in Seattle's a big union. And so it killed him. He sat out, and they didn't replace those teachers with scabs. What did they do? Didn't start school. You know when he got out of school last year? June 28th. Because all those days that teachers were on strike, kids didn't come to school. And they had to make the days up. So strikes are crazy. The Billings strike was just as bad. And the reason it affected me is because people in town got so upset about the teacher strike that they chose for many years not to vote for the school's mill levy. Now, you don't understand that, but I'll explain to you because Wyoming's way different. If you want to buy new textbooks for schools in Montana and you don't have the money, you run a mill levy, which means that you ask the taxpayers of the community to pay. Kind of put it in layman's terms. You need $250,000 to buy textbooks for all the students in Billings because you're short of money, okay? So you put a levy out and they'll say, well, on a $100,000 house, if this levy passes, it's going to cost you $1.57 a month. That's how they collect this tax. Well, people vote on that. They vote whether they want to pay that tax or not. Who wants to pay tax? Nobody, really. So these mill levies fail all the time. And when they're $250,000 short, they have to make cuts, just like the University of Wyoming, I think was like $50 million worth of cuts they had to make this year. And that affects a lot of things. Now, if you take a school district, and I don't know if we talked about this before, you know what 80% of this Washakie County school district budget's used to pay for? 80% probably? No? Wages. That's right. So really, I don't know the percentage here, but I'm guessing I'm pretty right. 70 to 80% of school districts' budget is tagged into wages. Cooks, teachers, bus drivers, coaches, paras. And the other 20% used to pay for you to get an education. That's how it usually works. Well, Wyoming funds students at about $16,000 apiece. So ANB, average number belonging, is a big deal because if we have 1,000 students in our school district this year, next year we get 16,000 times 1,000 in our budget from the feds. Okay, does that make sense? So numbers are big. In Montana, you know what they pay per kid? About 4,000. So, I mean, do you see the battle? So that's why Wyoming has a great reputation of the legislative support. Well, now, our minerals and stuff are kind of going, and so that's why you're seeing cuts like big time now. Okay, so you're not going to see big teacher raises. You know, you're going to see things, don't quote me on this, but you see things like maybe that students are going to, don't say I said, I'm just making an example. Students might have to pay for their own meals on trips. They're going to have to make some cuts because we're down in the doppers money-wise, so you're going to see some of that. But that's what strikes do. Strikes leave a bad taste in your mouth. Now here's where my point where it affected me. So I leave Roberts, Montana, where I'm very happy, but I've been there a long time, and I've been in a school where we had 170 kids, K-12, and I wanted to try a bigger school, so I went to Billings West. We had more teachers at Billings West than I had students at Roberts. Anyway, so I wanted to go to Billings West. I enjoyed my time there. Principal brought me in at the end of the year. He did not foresee this. He says, listen, I just want you to know that we just had a big budget meeting, and if the mill levy doesn't pass in May, we're cutting 4 administrative positions, we're cutting this alternative school, we're cutting these activities. You were the last guy hired, you'll be the first one gone if we have to make cuts. Okay? Well, I knew that mill levy was never going to pass because of the feelings in the community still about that teacher strike. It had been affected for years. So I went looking for a job and found one, but I would have, if the mill levy failed, I would have gotten RIF, reduction in force, no question about it. So that's what strikes can do to people. It can cause a lot of issues. So just kind of wanted to explain that. All right, last thing we'll talk about today quickly will be the election of 1920. The election of 1920. The election of 1920. Now the Republicans nominated Warren G. Harding for president during this election. He really didn't have any political experience, but he was very well liked politically. And I'll explain that to you in a minute. Anybody want to guess what his job was before he was nominated as president of the United States? He was the owner of a newspaper in Ohio. He was a newspaper owner. But he kind of climbed to the top of the political ladder in his home state. He was kind of a big deal, okay? Didn't have any politics at that time, but he once served as a United States Senator. So he was out of the political game, he was an owner of a newspaper in Ohio, but people still remembered him for his service in the Senate. And he was a very easygoing guy, real low-key, real easygoing, and people liked him. So the Republicans nominate Warren G. Harding for president. He's the owner of a newspaper in Ohio, and he had climbed to the top of the political ladder in his home state as he served for a period of time in the United States Senate, was a very easy-going man. Guess who his running mate's gonna be?
Come on.
What? Calvin Coolidge, okay? Massachusetts Governor Calvin Coolidge is gonna run with Warren G. Harding on the Republican ticket, and that's gonna be a key choice, because Harding's gonna have some problems, okay? So, vice presidential candidate for the Republicans in the election of 1920 will be Massachusetts Governor Calvin Coolidge. The Democrats nominated Ohio Governor James M. Cox for the presidency. So you got the battle of the Ohioans here. Both candidates are from Ohio. Okay, so the Democratic Party nominates Ohio Governor James M. Cox for the presidency. And guess who he picks for the vice presidency? FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or Franklin D. Roosevelt, is the vice presidential candidate in 1920. How many people knew that Roosevelt actually lost an election like this? Yeah, not many people know that. So the Democratic Party nominated Ohio Governor James M. Cox for the presidency and newcomer Franklin D. Roosevelt for the vice presidency. Well, it really wasn't a very close election. Harding won what they called the Battle of the Ohioans, defeating Cox 404 electoral votes to 127 to become the nation's 29th president. And we got time to go to the next one, I think. Yep, I will. Harding won the Battle of the Ohioans, defeating Cox 404 electoral votes to 127, and he becomes the nation's 29th president. And I do want to cover the next subtopic because it has everything to do with Wyoming.
I was going to say it's not finished.
Yeah. So our next subtopic and our last one of the day will be public scandals during the Harding administration. And this specifically deals with your state. Public scandals during the Harding administration. You know, Warren Harding was not a bad president. The problem was his administration, not so much him but his cabinet, left a real long, sorry record of scandals. It was one scandal after another during the Harding presidency. Okay? And it really wasn't so much him. He picked bad cabinet members, is what he did. And he was not himself involved in any of these scandals, but his cabinet was, and he took the fall. And of the many scandals that took place during Harding's term, the most famous was known as the Teapot Dome scandal. And I think you will get a question on this on your AP exam. I really do. The Teapot Dome scandal. Anybody know what that is? It's a place in Wyoming called Teapot Dome. And what was there at the time was a naval oil reserve. In other words, the Navy had oil reserved in tanks at Teapot Dome, Wyoming. So the scandal would take place at a naval oil reserve at Teapot Dome in Wyoming. And this scandal involved two very important members of Harding's cabinet. His Secretary of Interior, Albert Fall, and his Secretary of the Navy, Edwin Denby. So the two cabinet members of Harding's administration that were involved in this Teapot Dome scandal were Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, and Secretary of the Navy, Edwin Denby. They were the two players in this deal. Well, who has jurisdiction among these two men over the naval oil reserve in Teapot Dome, Wyoming? Denby would, okay, the Secretary of the Navy. What happened is Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, persuaded Secretary of the Navy, Edwin Denby, to transfer those Teapot Dome oil reserves to his jurisdiction. So he would have say over what was done with them. So again, Secretary of the Interior, Fall, persuaded Secretary of the Navy, Denby, to transfer the jurisdiction over those oil reserves, those naval oil reserves at Teapot Dome to him. Now what is that oil supposed to be used for? The Navy. Well, what Albert Fall did is he leased the oil reserves to private oil speculators. What are speculators again? We talked about land speculators when we talk about the colonies. What do speculators do? They buy for a price and sell higher. So what Fall did is he sold, you can call it leased, but he basically leased or rented these oil reserves to private speculators. Now, what does that mean? It's kind of confusing. It's like, I'll give you a comparison. My old principal in Montana, good guy, but what he did is he had a gambling problem. And so when we would have ball games, he would count the money and he'd take a couple hundred out of the money and then he would go gamble with it and then he'd come back Monday, win or lose, and always put that 200 back. So technically he never stole the money, he leased it, kind of. You see what I mean? Now he might have taken that $200 and won $700 and came up with a $500 profit and put it back, or he might have got his butt kicked and then had to find $200 somewhere and put it back. So he never took the money. Well, he got caught because there was always a $200 discrepancy. He didn't know that the secretary was counting it that night, and she would count it and it'd be $1,300, and then she would count it again on Monday morning, and there would be $1,500. So she always was $200 higher on Monday than she was on Saturday. In those days, you played Friday and Saturday games, that was it. So he got caught and got fired. Did he steal the money? No, he leased it illegally to try to make money. That's what this guy did. See, does that make sense? He leased it out to these oil reserves and he made money. Well, the scandal became public in early 1923. Both Albert Fall and Denby were prosecuted and they were sent to prison. Can't do that. So both Fall and Denby were prosecuted and sent to prison. That was in 1923 early. That same year, Harding's health broke under all these pressures and all these scandals, and he died in the summer of 1923 of a heart attack, and Vice President Calvin Coolidge assumed the presidency. So again, the scandal becomes public early in 1923. Both Albert Fall and Edwin Denby were prosecuted and sent to prison. Meanwhile, President Harding's health broke under all these pressures of scandal, and he died in the summer of 1923 of a heart attack, and President Harding was succeeded by Vice President Calvin Coolidge. Now, I want to make a point before I quit. Coolidge is going to stay in politics. Can he run in the next election?
Yes.
Can he run the election after that?
Yes.
Yes, because he was not elected, he assumed. Okay, that'll take us to the election of 1924, which we will start on Monday. For those of you that are gone tomorrow, you'll miss this great video. The ones that are here, we're going to watch something on Craig Sager. Very inspirational.
Are you on the website or